was a quiet and ordinary life, at least from the outside. A single father lived with his two daughters in an old house on the edge of the town. The house was large, slightly worn out, but still strong enough to feel like a home. For the father, it was more than just a place to live. It was where he had raised his daughters after their mother passed away. He loved them deeply. Everything he did was for them. The older daughter was calm and responsible, always helping around the house, while the younger one was cheerful and full of life. Their laughter often filled the empty halls, bringing warmth to a place that would otherwise feel lonely. During the day, the house felt normal. Sunlight entered through the windows, and everything seemed peaceful. But at night, the atmosphere changed in a way that was hard to explain. The silence became deeper, almost unnatural. The walls seemed to hold on to shadows longer than they should. The father sometimes felt it too, that strange uneasiness that crept in after midnight. He would wake up for no reason, feeling like something was not right. But every time he checked on his daughters, they were sleeping peacefully, unaware of anything unusual. He always told himself it was just stress, or maybe loneliness. After all, taking care of two children alone was not easy. He tried to ignore the feeling, focusing only on keeping his daughters safe and happy. But what he didn't realize was that the calm life he believed in was only the beginning. Something unseen was already part of that house, and it had been watching them from the very start. After months of struggling, the father finally made a decision that he believed would change their lives for the better. The old house they were living in had become too expensive to maintain, and he wanted a fresh start for his daughters. That's when he found a new house on the outskirts of the town, large, quiet, and surprisingly cheap. At first, it felt like a blessing. The house was bigger than their previous one, with long hallways, tall ceilings, and an old-fashioned structure that gave it a strange but interesting charm. The daughters were excited, running from room to room, imagining their new lives there. The father smiled, thinking he had made the right choice. But something about the house felt off. On the day they moved in, a few neighbors quietly watched them from a distance. Their expressions were not welcoming. Instead, there was something uneasy in their eyes, as if they knew something the family didn't. One old man even tried to approach the father, as if he wanted to say something important, but then he stopped himself and walked away. That moment stayed in the father's mind. Later that evening, as the sun set and darkness slowly filled the house, the strange feeling grew stronger. The walls seemed colder, and the silence inside felt heavier than normal. Even the smallest sounds echoed in a way that didn't feel right. The father tried to ignore it. He told himself that every old house had its own sounds, and that it was just a matter of getting used to a new place. But deep inside, he couldn't shake the feeling that this house was not just empty. It felt like something had been waiting there long before they arrived. And now, it was no longer alone. First, the strange things were so small that they were easy to ignore. On the second night in the new house, the father was awakened by a soft creaking sound. It seemed like one of the doors had moved slightly. He opened his eyes and listened carefully, but everything went quiet again. Assuming it was just the wind, he went back to sleep. But the next night, it happened again. This time, the sound was clearer, like slow footsteps moving across the hallway. The father sat up, his heart beating faster, trying to convince himself that it was just the old wooden floor. Still, something about it didn't feel right. The daughters also began to notice things. The younger one mentioned that her toys were not where she had left them. At first, the father smiled and told her she must have forgotten. But then the older daughter said the same thing, that something in her room had changed without her touching it. Days passed, and the strange events slowly became more frequent. Doors would open slightly on their own, even when no one was near them. At night, faint sounds echoed through the house, soft knocks, distant movements, and sometimes something that sounded almost like whispering. Then one evening, the younger daughter said something that made the father pause. She told him she had made a new friend. When he asked who it was, she simply smiled and said, "He comes at night." The father felt a chill run down his spine. He looked at the older daughter, expecting her to laugh it off. But instead, she remained silent, her expression serious. Because deep down, she had started noticing it too, and whatever was in the house was no longer trying to stay hidden. At first, the change in the older daughter was so subtle that the father barely noticed it. She had always been quiet and responsible, but now there was something different about her silence. It felt heavier, distant. She started spending more time alone in her room, often sitting in the dark without turning on the lights. One night, the father woke up to a faint sound coming from her room. It sounded like whispering. At first, he thought she might be talking on the phone, but when he checked, her phone was lying untouched on the table. The whispering continued. He slowly pushed the door open and saw her sitting on the bed, her back facing him. She was speaking softly, as if someone was sitting right in front of her. But the room was empty. "Who are you talking to?" he asked. She stopped instantly. For a few seconds, there was complete silence. Then she slowly turned her head toward him. Her face looked pale, and her eyes seemed different, darker somehow. "No one," she replied quietly. The father felt uneasy but decided not to push further. He told himself it was just stress or imagination. But things didn't stop there. Over the next few days, her behavior became more disturbing. She stopped laughing, stopped playing with her sister, and often stared into empty spaces as if she could see something others couldn't. Then one night, she said something that made the father freeze. "He calls me when you're asleep." A cold silence filled the room. The father asked, "Who?" She slowly smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "The one who lives here." At that moment, the father realized something terrifying. His daughter wasn't just imagining things. She was talking to something real. And whatever it was getting closer to her every night. The fear inside the house was no longer something the father could ignore. What had started as small, strange incidents had now turned into something much darker. The atmosphere in the house felt heavy all the time, even during the day. The warmth that once existed between the father and his daughters was slowly fading, replaced by silence and unease. The younger daughter, who used to be cheerful and full of life, had started to change too. She became quiet, often staying close to her father as if she was afraid to be alone. One evening, she tightly held his hand and whispered something that made his heart sink. "Someone stands in my room at night." The father tried to stay calm and asked her what she meant. She pointed toward the hallway and said, "A tall shadow. It just watches me." A cold chill ran through his body. That same night, the father decided to stay awake. He sat in the living room, waiting, listening to every small sound. Hours passed, and everything seemed normal until he heard it. Footsteps. Slow, heavy, moving across the hallway. His breath stopped. He stood up carefully and followed the sound. As he reached near his daughter's room, the footsteps suddenly stopped. The hallway fell into complete silence. Then, something even worse happened. The door to the room creaked open slightly on its own. The father felt frozen in place. His mind was telling him to run, but his body refused to move. He slowly looked inside the room, but everything seemed still. Yet, the feeling was undeniable. They were not alone. The fear had now become real. And whatever was inside the house was no longer hiding in the shadows. It was moving freely, watching them, waiting for the right moment. Now, the fear inside the house had become impossible to ignore. The father knew that something was terribly wrong, and he could no longer protect his daughters by pretending everything was normal. He needed answers. The next day, he decided to speak to the neighbors, the same people who had watched them silently when they first arrived. At first, no one wanted to talk. Their faces turned pale when he mentioned the house. But finally, an old man agreed to tell him the truth. What he heard made his blood run cold. Years ago, a family had lived in that same house, a father and his two daughters. From the outside, they seemed like a normal family, just like them. But behind closed doors, something dark was happening. The father had slowly lost his mind. People in the neighborhood often heard strange noises, screams, and whispers coming from the house at night. Then one night, everything went silent. Days later, the truth came out. The man had done something horrible to his own daughters before ending his own life. No one knew exactly what happened inside, but after that, the house was never the same again. People claimed they could still hear footsteps at night. Some said they saw shadows moving behind the windows. Others believed that whatever darkness had consumed that man never truly left the house. The father felt a deep fear rising inside him. Everything suddenly made sense. The whispers, the footsteps, his daughter's strange behavior. When he returned home, the house felt different, heavier. As he stepped inside, he noticed something that made him freeze. His older daughter was standing in the hallway, completely still, staring into the darkness. Slowly, she turned her head toward him and smiled. But it wasn't her smile. In that moment, the father realized the horrifying truth. Whatever had once lived in that house was now inside his home again, and this time it had chosen his family. That night, the house felt darker than ever before. The father could no longer ignore the truth. Whatever was inside the house had now taken control of his daughter. The air felt heavy, and every corner of the house seemed alive with something unseen. He knew he had to act before it was too late. As midnight approached, a strange silence spread through the house. The younger daughter was asleep in her room, unaware of the danger. The father stayed awake, watching, waiting, his heart pounding with fear. Then he heard it, a soft sound coming from the hallway. He slowly stepped out of his room and saw his older daughter standing there. She wasn't moving. Her head was slightly tilted, and her face was hidden in the darkness. "Come here," she whispered. But her voice didn't sound like her own. The father felt a chill run through his body. He tried to speak, but no words came out. Then suddenly, she started walking, slowly, unnaturally, toward her younger sister's room. Panic took over him. He rushed forward and grabbed her arm, trying to stop her. But her strength was unnatural. She turned toward him, and for a moment, he saw her face clearly. Her eyes were dark, empty, as if something else was looking through them. "She belongs to us now," a voice echoed from her lips. The father realized what was about to happen. Without thinking, he made the hardest decision of his life. He pulled her away, trying to protect his younger daughter at any cost. The struggle grew intense, and in that moment of fear and desperation, everything went silent. The next morning, the house stood quiet once again. Neighbors later said they saw the father leaving the house alone, his face pale, his eyes empty. No one ever saw the daughters again, and the house was never empty.